O'Sullivan against Paul Hunter in the final of the 2004 Masters. What was the difference between the two players in that semi-final, Steve?
I think when Ronnie got his chances towards the end, he took more of them than Jimmy. Jimmy at 4-all had a chance to smash into some of the reds and got himself in a bit of a mess-up and didn't score enough points early in the frame. It's easily done, I know myself from that situation. But in the end, Ronnie just showed perhaps he had the class and the fact he had a bit more experience and been in that situation a few more times recently.
What's your reading of the game, John?
Yeah, very much what Steve said there. Just when it came down to 4-4, you know, Jimmy's been really good all week. He's pulled it out when he's needed to, and basically, you know, Ronnie was very strong the last two frames, very strong.
Relieved, but with quite a grin on your face. What an almighty scare and a battle that was for you.
Yeah, it was a Tony Drago fist at the end there. Yeah, I'm just obviously delighted to get through the match. Ryan's a fantastic player. He's going to be a top player, I'm sure, in the coming years, but just delighted to get through.
What a match. He was so close to going out with that pink. Remember when he was on the pink? I mean, you must know the shot. There he was, queuing up on the pink. Yeah. Just overstretching a fraction?
Yeah, he was.
But you couldn't believe it, could you?
No, couldn't believe it. But it's one of these shots, I'm sure he'll never forget. He'll never ever forget about it. It doesn't matter how many tournaments he goes on and wins. He'll never forget about that pink he's just missed.
Did you think from that moment, I've got to take advantage of this now? Did you steel yourself then and say, this is the time?
Well, it was still quite a difficult clearance, and at that time I wasn't feeling the best. I'd missed a few easy shots and 9-7 down, but I managed to hang in there and I managed to clear up to make it 9-8, and then it's just all about pressure really at the end. The two of us were missing easy shots, we were potting hard shots. It was just the pressure was unbelievable. Yeah.
Moving on to the last frame, there was a situation with two reds left where Ryan Day had a chance of either a snooker or a pot. We're not saying it's a right or wrong shot, but you said, we were just sitting here, you wouldn't like him to have snookered you.
No, I was sitting in my chair thinking, well, I'm in trouble here because you want to snooker me here.
And you got misses all over the place.
Exactly, the way the miss rule is, the time you manage to hit a red, he might only need the red to actually win the match, the second last red, because the way the miss rule is, I could have been called for about 4 or 5 shots here, so I was quite pleased they went for it, and then obviously missed it. So,
I've heard you say that you sort of haven't had the best of confidence of late, but now that was a gritty performance. Is that sort of demonstrating to yourself that you can do something when the chips are down?
Yeah, well obviously I suppose I can, but I've been struggling a little bit confidence-wise. But a game like that could be the game that could kickstart you into doing something. I'm hoping it can kickstart me into having a good tournament.
You've got a fantastic record here. If you go back, you perform well here.
Yeah, I mean it's one of the tournaments, the UK and the world. I suppose the better players come through and do well, and I've managed to have a good record. But it's going to be very tough, whoever I play next. But it's one of the games that I can't believe I'm through. So I'll just relax and enjoy it for the next few days, and then get ready for my game. I don't think I play next Sunday, so I'll still be here.
Nice to see you smiling, John.
Well, that is a job well done this afternoon by Ronnie O'Sullivan. First of all, let's talk about the way he's approached this match and his form within it.
Ronnie O'Sullivan has come out of the starting blocks very quickly today. He's looked very much assured around the table. It's obviously easier to be assured when things are going in your direction, but the way he's got them in his direction, obviously Stephen's made some mistakes, but Ronnie's potted the balls, and I think he just looks so fluent around the table.
In a nutshell, why has Stephen Maguire not played anything like we know he can?
Well, you never know how it's going to go a final. The first couple of frames can determine what's going to happen, and he just couldn't get going. And when you're playing someone like Ronnie, the frames don't last that long, and he just never really got his cue action going. But as he shook hands at the end there, he had a little smile anyway. He's devastated, but at least he smiled there, and he's probably thinking, well, it's a bad day at the office and I'm up against a genius.
He looked pretty disconsolate, and in fact, when you try things, they just don't come off. It seemed, particularly as those frames went on. In that last frame, there was one, the opening red, Dennis. You picked this one out.
Well, we were talking, Steve and me were saying, well, look, he normally would knock this type of shot in. He's got a good cue action, but when you're 7-0 behind, that is such a difficult shot to play. You know, he needs to be in amongst the balls, and he really hasn't been in amongst the balls and around the black.
Well, he did miss a couple of easy shots and a couple of positional shots went astray. His whole game's been out today, and it's effectively it's sort of start the car and go up the motorway job. I really don't see how he can get it back. Obviously, he's going to have enough time to sort of sit back and go, right, OK, that's a terrible session. Let's see if I can improve, or I've got nothing to lose now tonight. And it can sometimes change around, but the best you could hope for when things are going like this is to share frames. So you're looking at 10-2 as a quite an optimistic outcome.
You know, the irony is, Dennis, he was 7-1 up on Sean Murphy in the last match, in a real grudge match there. And he was quoted as saying, after beating Sean, it was 9-5 in that match. He was quoted as saying, well, to come back from 7-1, it has to happen once in a lifetime. I just have to bide my time. Ironically, the boot is now on the other foot, and he must be aware that Ronnie's thinking exactly that tonight.
It's the first to 10 now, and I don't know about Steve, but I always felt, as long as your opponent, no matter how far you were behind it, if he needed 2 frames, you always felt you had a bit of a chance. It's when it got to that 1 frame that they need. I mean, 8-0 is... But listen, you never know what can happen at the game. But Ronnie, the form that he's in, I think he's come back after the maximum break. We all thought, how's he going to be today? The fact he's got his family here, I've seen him beforehand, he had little Lily in his arms, he was totally relaxed, and I think that's helped him forget about the maximum.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Ronnie this week. I think what's been so evident, he's been such a cheerful mood, he's been in absolutely terrific form, but he's looked composed and determined throughout the entire week. You compare that with 12 months ago, he was walking out of this tournament, Steve.
That's right, yes, and he didn't seem to really be interested in snooker. He wasn't happy with himself, and he certainly wasn't happy on the table against Stephen Hendry when he shook hands at 4-1 behind. And all of a sudden now you see a player who's not only looking capable on the television, but all of a sudden when he gets behind in a match, doesn't go into his shell and start to get a bit depressed. He starts to try and fight his way out of trouble, and that match against Mark Selby was a massive character builder for him. I know he's a great player anyway, but a superb character builder. Probably proved to himself how good a player he actually is.
Well, he's certainly been proving it last night and indeed today. Gentlemen, we're going to be coming back at 8 o'clock tonight for what could be a coronation, because it's Ronnie who...
A few corridors and on your way to the dressing room, and there's Sean getting ready to have a little bit of a break. 4 more frames to come in round about 20 minutes' time. Well, he's got a frame, but even if he hadn't, he's the king of the comebacks, hasn't he, here at the Crucible? He knows what to do if he's down. Remember in the final, wasn't he 5-3 down and 10-6 down in the final?
He was to Matthew Stevens, and I recall he's the only one, I think, at the Crucible. He was 12-7 down to Matthew Stevens in a quarter-final match and won 13-12. He's the only one. The players have come back from 12-8 down, but I think he's the only one ever to do it from 12-7, so he doesn't get too worried by being behind. But at the same time, you don't want to be giving John Higgins frame starts.
Observations on the first 4 frames, Ken?
Well, both of them look pretty good. John looks a little bit better. Obviously, he's got a 3-1 lead. He'll be very, very happy. Sean, he's off and running, basically, and he'll be happy to get that frame under his belt, basically. At 3-0 down, didn't want to lose or go into the interval 4-0 down. So he's off and running. I suppose both players will be pretty pleased.
Early on in the final, with so long to go, do you just want to get into the balls? Don't get too alarmed either way, whether you're 3-1 up or 3-1 down, as long as you're queuing okay and you're in the balls on occasion.
You can do, but I mean, John's had a fabulous start there to go 3-0. I mean, it's just, you know, to look at the scoreboard and see yourself 3-0 up in a world final is a great start. And obviously, I know what Ken's saying exactly. You know, for Sean, he's got some crumbs of comfort. He's only 2 behind now because he's won that first frame. But from John Higgins' point of view, first mini session over, I've won it. Next mini session coming up, make sure whatever you do, even the worst way, get a result, you know, is a draw.
2-2, yeah.
2-2, anything like that. Anything above that bonus, you know you're taking the lead in.
And you've both been talking about the mental strength that's required, and they're both tough as nails, both these players, aren't they?
Yeah, they are very tough. As John said, like, both players have come back. You know, Sean came back against Stephen Hendry when he was 5-2 down as well, after he had that magnificent 1-4-7. Long way to go, right? It's very early days, but it's shaping up.
A new short form of snooker is...
And Scotland's Graham Dott have excelled over the last 2 weeks to get here. And yet, on such an important day, this sport has been stunned by allegations concerning its #1 player, John Higgins, the last man to lift that trophy. A tabloid newspaper today alleges that the 3-time world champion and his manager, Pat Mooney,
agreed to accept hundreds of thousands of pounds in return for arranging the outcome of 4 frames in different matches in the coming year. There is no suggestion or evidence that John Higgins has ever fixed a frame or match in the past. Well, about an hour ago, I spoke to the chairman of World Snooker, Barry Hearn, and asked him about the latest developments in this story. Past have been banned for 5 and 8 years respectively. Were John Higgins to be found guilty of these allegations, what would be the consequences which might befall him?
It would be wrong of me, Hazel, to try and judge the length of bans. It falls outside my responsibility. This would come under David Douglas and the disciplinary panel. But clearly, if allegations were founded, you will be talking about a very, very, very lengthy ban.
Barry, you've just come onto the board. You have big plans for the sport. I wonder how this story and its potential repercussions affect your plans now. Will you walk away from the sport? Well, with me now, 2 former champions, Steve Davis, John Parrott. It's a very disappointing day indeed for many reasons. Where does all of this leave the sport, Steve?
I think currently under a huge cloud, and speaking as a player, it's a dark day for me, and I'm sure every player in the game should feel quite depressed today, and perhaps unfortunately there are 2 players who have got to get on with the job of winning the World Championship. But it's a wake-up call for players as well, and if there is anything to be had from this horrible situation, the future for snooker must change perhaps.
There are, of course, 2 sides to every story. We must always remember that. But John, the timing of this is shattering just ahead of the Crucible final.
Couldn't be worse. Could not be worse. And as Steve said, there's a black cloud over the sport and indeed over the start of the final today. And I think that's very unfair on the 2 lads who have shown honesty and integrity for the last 14 days in the hope of realising a dream and winning the World Championships. And it's very disappointing, the timing.
It is indeed. Well, clearly